Hey everyone, welcome to the Darshan Talks podcast. I am your host, Darshan Kulkarni. It's my mission to help patients trust the products they depend on. As you may know, I'm an attorney, I'm a pharmacist, and I advise companies with FDA regulated products. So if you have an interest in FDA regulated companies or their products, this is the podcast for you. So today's podcast is about practicing supply chain, about discussing a new paradigm in supply chain and to look at how it can be done better. Our guest today is a practicing supply chain consultant to the pharma industry. He's also an advocate for paradigm shifting change in the industry, and he uses knowledge as a consultant to push the fact that the industry has to change. He is the author of a republished book, Find It, File It, Flog It, and he is also a managing consultant for Pharma Flow. Ladies and gentlemen, Hedley Reese. Hey, Hedley.
Hi, Darshan. It's nice to be on here with you. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for coming on. Let's start with the beginning. How did you get the idea to write Find It, File It, Flog It?
Well, I was permanently employed in the industry for, 25 years. And I became an independent consultant in 2005. And after about 5 or 6 years, the pharmaceutical sciences editor of Wiley, he saw some training on supply chain management I'd done on the internet. And he said, he emailed me and said that would convert nicely into a book. So would you like to write a book? So in 2011, Wiley published Supply Chain Management in the Drug Industry, Delivering Patient Value for Pharmaceuticals and Biologics. Now, that was about a 450-page book that covered the industry, all the disciplines of supply chain management. Sold in around 60 countries, not in huge volumes because it was about £75 at the time, and it's a bit more than that now. So, but the final chapter, I concluded this industry is the most disconnected industry known to man, and the supply chains are even more disconnected. So the issues we see in supply chains are the product of the way we develop drugs. And I wasn't getting the message over. I'm still not really getting the message over, but I wrote Find It, File It, Flog It in 2015. I self-published it with Amazon. And I coined this term, Find It, which is find the molecule, and obviously patent the molecule, develop it, submit the filing, and then market it with what I call verve and vigor. The only thing is that the middle piece, the development piece and the filing, in the mid-'80s was almost totally outsourced to third-party developers. And that really took the control of drug development out of the hands of the big pharmas and the pharmaceutical companies and put it into the hands of service providers, third-party clinical research organizations and contract development and manufacturing organizations. So it sort of created a disconnect. Not that they were not capable companies, developing products well, but it created that sort of us and them environment, and then the big farmers come in at the end when the product's approved and launched to do the sales and marketing. I talk about a pivotal event in 1981. 5 years before that, SmithKline and French launched Tagamet, which you probably know, an anti-ulcer drug. It was a 12-year program. It was a model of drug development, and Sir James Black, who was in charge of the program, he was awarded the Nobel Prize. Around 5 years after the launch of Tagamet, Glaxo launched Zantac, and Sir David Jack, who was the head of the Glaxo Zantac program, he said, all we really did was clean up the process. So they developed that in 5 years, and actually he was a very sharp person, obviously, and they realized when they cleaned the process up, there were less side effects. They could have been marginal. I don't know exactly how much less, but so Glaxo targeted physicians, doctors with their sales messages, and within 3 or 4 years, Zantac was outselling, was outselling Tagamet by 3-1. So that sent a message: if you've got a patented molecule and approval to sell, then you can really create a blockbuster with clever sales and marketing. Excuse me. And that strategy has sort of like grown in the industry. And because it appeared to be working, most of the farmers sold off their manufacturing facilities and let their people go. And we got to the stage now where basically the large pharma companies don't have the skill, the people, the skills or resources to actually develop their own drugs. And this is where we see less and less drugs come to market, poor R&D productivity, because the model of drug development has become broken. What I then realized that in my research, I look back to penicillin, to insulin, to the polio vaccine, and I realized in those days, up to the 50s, healthcare professionals were actually at the core of drug development. You know, if you take Banting, you know, and the people he worked with, they ground up the pancreas of a pig, and you know they did preclinical, well, clinical testing on themselves once they knew they had a level of safety. So the healthcare professionals were there at the start and all the way through the process. These days, healthcare professionals don't get involved, other than a few investigators on the trial, until the drug is launched. And by then, they may say, well, you know, it's not doing what I wanted, and I would have done this differently, I would have done that differently. So we've gone from a health professional focused and patient focused approach in the industry to basically a patented molecule approach. And, you know, we're seeing that the effects of it now. And I write about and I'm very much advocate an approach which is a two-step approach. The first is prototyping, small-scale prototypes of drug compounds, even in the hospital setting, with doctors and people who understand the manufacturing process. But they work together and they develop the compound in collaboration with patients and the pharmacology people and the pharmaceutical technologists, so that the drug is constantly being optimized through the prototyping phase. And then there would be a joint selection of a prototype that appeared to be doing, in terms of safety, efficacy, and quality, seemed to be the most effective. And then you would build the supply chain based on the knowledge that you've built with the prototype. And the concept is you build a lot more evidence of the compound's potential to get over the valley of death by using predictive technologies such as organ on a chip, ex vivo tests using tissue. The technologies have moved on unrecognizably over the last 30, 40 years, but they're still not being properly harnessed. So what Finding Flog is about is moving from this 3-stage model, bump, 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 to a much simpler, more collaborative 2-stage model. And that's the way any product in the world is developed. You look at any product, it's 2 stages: prototype and then commercial supply.
But that raises a few different questions, right? I mean, you're talking about taking products that may not have been tested in humans, and then doing iterative tests on people, and the industry is rife with problems with that methodology, and that people have died because how do you sort of get ethics consults on that? So what was your thought process and how we balance that out?
Yeah, good question. Well, I emphasize an ex vivo prototyping. So you don't go into humans, you minimize the amount of animal testing. You have to build evidence. I always go back to penicillin. 1928, Alexander Fleming, he arrived home from holiday, August 1928, and it's a well-known fact that he found a mold in his agar plate that appeared to be killing bacteria. But he didn't have the faintest idea what was in that mold. It took Fleming 12 years to actually find an organization that could help him isolate what that active ingredient was, and it actually was Oxford University. And they managed to isolate it, and they could make gram quantities. They couldn't make much more than 50, 60 grams, but they used those small quantities to build evidence preclinically and clinically that the compound was actually working. So World War II was coming up, and they did the preclinical test in animals, but there were some soldiers, there were a few events where someone was dying, and they gave them penicillin and they recovered, and there was really strong evidence that penicillin was doing the job, but they couldn't work out how they actually managed to make it in the sort of quantities that they needed. So they flew off to your side of the pond, Darshan, and spoke to the US Department of Agriculture. There was a guy there called Andrew J. Moyer, who was an expert in making molds, in manufacturing molds. And he devised the process for them, which increased the yields exponentially. And, so they were making 10 quantities of penicillin based on his process. Moyer was awarded the patent. And what I'm saying is that was a highly collaborative project that had the healthcare professional, the chemists who could isolate the active ingredient, and the manufacturing people who could make it at scale. And if they had been together at the start, penicillin would have come to market in about 4 years rather than 15 years. So, it's all about getting the disciplines collaborating at the start. Now, I know what you're going to say, but yes, drug development is very risky. Look at the chance of failure. Well, you address that issue and you use proper technologies and predictive technologies to reduce the chance that a compound is going to fail, because you're picking the compound that's got all the characteristics that it needs to get to market.
So I have a comment from Dinesh Anchal, and he says target research with predefined methodology is a way to window for the correction factor. I'm not 100% sure if he's saying that. I think he's agreeing with you based on what I can tell, but I feel like it's a general comment. So do you want to respond to it, or?
Well, I'm not a scientist. I listen to scientists all the time. I've worked closely with them over the years. Yeah. I'm a sort of an uncarved block, if you like. That I take everything factually and I try and make sure I understand things.
Yeah.
And all I'm saying is I don't expect me to understand the scientific parts of it.
Fair enough. So let me ask you a different version of that question, though. So you said it would take. Let's first start with the issues associated with what the current methodology is, because to get to your process, we've got to start with what's wrong with the first process. So with that, the first question that comes to mind for me, at least, is you land up with this. The comment you made was pharma doesn't have the people, skills, or resources to launch its own drugs. But isn't that because what we are doing is a more collaborative process, in that what pharma does right now is it'll go to Oxford or Cambridge or to any of the big universities or small universities or small companies and go, you have some IP, some intellectual property that's worth getting together. What I'd like to do is get that intellectual property, and then I have a choice of thousands of different research options that are going on, and pick the ones that are right for my company. On the other hand, what I hear you saying with your methodology is that we can customize, we can get it right the first time. What they're saying is, why bother getting it right the first time when I can choose amongst the many options that already are there and they're getting it right? So I don't have to take the risk of investment in ideas that aren't completely that are probably half-baked, shall we say.
Yeah, what I'd say to that, and you may not like it because you're a lawyer, but until it's got to market, until it can be made at scale and manufactured, doesn't exist. What goes into the patient has been manufactured by the big contract manufacturers, Cattle and Farmer Solutions, Lonza, Patheon, Allmark. Those guys know what they do. But so I would say 95% of IP is not IP in this industry because they're just good ideas. They may not even be good ideas. So you've got to be sure you can make it at scale. Otherwise, it's a dead idea. So you go to research. The typical research university, they're lab scale, and they need to work with people who can say, this could work, that would never work, and it's putting those people together, and that's why I say, it's you can't work in isolation as a scientist and come up with good ideas, and then without working with other people to prove that they've got a good chance of working and getting to market.
And you then talk about this new methodology where you bring those scientists together and you bring them in the same room. I asked the question before, but how did you suggest we address the IRB concerns that they would have, that, oh, you've never tested this in someone, you're trying it first in human. How do you play around with that?
I mean, when I say healthcare professionals involved, they are co-developing the drug. So, IRB, all the ethical issues, is second nature to them. In fact, you'd see the standards of ethics in clinical trials shoot up. If you imagine you've got someone who, a company who understands drug development and they've got manufacturing experience. They go into the hospital, they sit down with the healthcare professionals, and the healthcare professional says, look, I've observed in these hundreds of patients that I think, someone's told me this compound could work. And there's a pancreatic cancer surgeon that I work with at the moment, Gareth Morris-Stiff. He's just left the Cleveland Clinic, and he's actually developing his own drugs on the knowledge that he's got of what works and what doesn't work in cancer, in pancreatic, and he's using some Indian technique, Ayavenger. I can't pronounce it, but and there's no reason why a doctor, a couple of healthcare professionals couldn't develop their own drugs. My experience, I know exactly what you have to do to get to raise an IND, to raise an NDA, and all the sort of work that has to go in there. It's not rocket science, and most of the knowledge is in the contract base, not in the actual, the product license holder companies. So I don't know if that makes sense.
Sort of does. So let me ask you an additional question. I'm sort of now talking about myself. So I'm a pharmacist by training. I've 6 years of pharmacy school. I have a doctorate in pharmacy. My experience, my training was all in how do you take care of a patient. I had very little to no experience through my pharmacy school on how do you actually get do drug development. Now, to be fair, there are universities that do that. For example, Rutgers has a really good program on has a really good fellowship program. I don't know how good their drug development program is and if it even exists. But the point being, I assume, and my ex-wife was a physician, and I can tell you that they didn't get that much training in that either. So they're really good at taking care of patients. But the actual, as you said, the drug development component of it, outside the research that they do, they don't really have a background in that. Now, that might change very well based on, like you said, in the past, they did do this in the past. And in the present, they'd have to change their minds around, they know exactly how to treat the patient. But I'm not sure I know too many physicians at this moment who can go, what would really help? Having this type of structure to a molecule, and let's sort of try to create that and play around with it and sort of, all those steps, the analytical chemistry part of it. But has that been your experience that they actually do, and I'm just talking to the wrong people?
See if I understand. Well, that's not. I mean, that isn't happening. You sound if you're saying what I would, what I'm suggesting is that those people actually talk together. I've got a good friend who's an engineer. He's trustee of the Institution of Chemical Engineers here in the UK.
Yeah.
And he's desperate to sit down with doctors to build a facility in the hospital, but not one of these giant facilities that need batch sizes the size of Mount Everest to to work. But we've if you look at other industry sectors, this make it
The iterative
farmers.
model.
Yeah. This paradigm shift is a bit like the auto industry in the 1960s. That concept that production is king, and you've got to produce as much as you can, never mind the quality. The customers will take it. And then Toyota and the other Japanese companies came along, and they showed that you could shoot quality up, you could shoot customer service up, and you could get quality. In most of these exemplar sectors, the Six Sigma quality levels are up to Six Sigma, which is 3.4 defects per million opportunities.
Yep.
In pharma, the levels, this people write on this, the levels about 2.5 to 3 Sigma, which is 70 to 100,000 defects per million opportunities. So the quality levels are similar to the way they were in the auto industry in the 1960s. Of course, those industries have changed. Now, people say to me, yeah, but pharma's never going to change. Well, I think patient power based on knowledge and understanding and education can force the change, because you can't go against your customer wishes forever. And I say that, and again, you're not going to like this, but I say at the root of all this is patent law, is compound claims patent law, which allows you to patent the molecule, and you haven't got the faintest idea if you'll ever do anything with it. And we know the attrition rates tell us that almost all of those good ideas, are going to go down the pan. So, we've got the evidence there. If we encourage pharma companies to collect more data on the safety and efficacy of their drug through predictive technologies, if we raise the bar with IND, so the developer would have to go and talk to physicians and say, tell me a bit more about what this is doing in the patient. At the moment you get an IND and you're off then to spend 6 years in clinical trials, and at the end of it it fails, and you wish it never started. So it's that mindset that there's a saying from Russ Aikoff, who's a well-known US systems thinking, very well known. He says, don't fight the system, change the rules and the system will change itself.
Right.
And that's right. If you change the rules in about how you get awarded a patent, or the amount of information you've got to submit to get an IND or an NDA or whatever, the companies start to change their behaviors, and it's got to be very collaborative. There's got to be consultation, but I think the industry would benefit from a consultation on the balance of risk and reward in the industry. How much effort should you have to be put in before you actually are awarded a patent for a drug? I think it's very skewed at the moment, the wrong way.
So it raises an interesting question. Have you ever heard of the term biohacking?
No, I haven't.
Okay. So essentially biohacking is people, and it's sort of a really good example of that would be what Alexander Fleming did, which is testing things on yourself to make sure that to do whatever you want them to do. And right now you've got biohackers looking at things like night vision. Like they're testing it on themselves to see if they can get night vision. We've got biohackers putting chips into themselves so that they don't have to carry credit cards with them. So those are examples of biohacking options. My question for you is, what I hear you saying without saying it, please feel free to correct me if I'm misquoting you in any way or misunderstanding you in any way. But what I hear you saying is, what you're talking about is a step removed from biohacking, where you're comfortable with the process, you're testing in small groups or testing on yourself, and then sort of then exposing it to larger groups. Just like you said, from prototyping phase all the way through. And a good sort of industry that's a parallel to that is sort of the medical device industry that does do the prototyping and then iterative improvement. And what I hear you saying is, why can't we do that in drug development? Is that fair, or is that mischaracterizing what you're saying?
No. That's absolutely. It's based on the fact that doctors are, they know so much about the indication they specialize in,
Yeah.
um, and they can detect if something's working that wouldn't be picked up otherwise. And they probably got a network, and they're having this conversation in the. Ivermectin is probably a classic at the moment. I know that's a little bit removed, but
Sure.
there is real. There's a real body of industry professionals who think it's doing a lot. And whether it is or not, I'm not qualified. But there are lots of things like you probably know better than me. You probably talk to more doctors than me. But I know a number who sort of say, or even sort of natural remedies, herbal, all these sorts of things. What I say is that a patient is a holistic. So, and when you get together to look at developing the drug, the first thing you do is you say, do we need a molecule? Do we need a drug? Or is there some other way of treating this condition? And Alzheimer's is a classic. We've had 30 failures in Alzheimer's, over 30 in the last 15 years. Some people I know say it's a drug target isn't relevant for Alzheimer's. Again, I don't know, but that would seem reasonable for me because it's such a complex condition. So you should be looking at that in a very holistic way. And what range of interventions can we make to help people's lives more manageable and bearable. So, yeah.
No, this is great. I'm just finding that we could keep talking about this forever, but it's sort of coming towards the end of the amount of time I can hold you here. So, before we continue, is there one question you'd like the audience to answer for us in the comments?
Well, the thing that always strikes me is that people in this industry don't realize the importance of, people see supply chains as moving boxes around from the pharmacy to often the warehouse, the pharmacy. They say actually supply chain and supply chain management is a far bigger set of disciplines which starts in early development and helps build the supply chain, bring value for patients. And I don't find many people in the industry who value that. So I mean, do people here think that the whole supply chain management is undervalued and not properly representation as regards science, just pure science, which sometimes never goes anywhere?
Great question. I'd love to hear the answers on that as well. Is the supply chain process undervalued in the process in the drug development timeline, if you will? My personal answer is I think it's criminally undervalued, and that became more and more evident during COVID because you had countries like the U.S. who had access to all the treatments, and there were countries, I believe it was Indonesia, but I could be wrong. Some countries in Southeast Asia who basically said, even if you gave us the intellectual property of the COVID vaccine that you guys have, we still couldn't use it because we don't have a cold supply chain. So we literally give the treatment or the vaccine if we had access to it. So I think it's personally. So during this podcast, we landed up talking about prototyping. We talked about basically a fundamental new way of thinking about the drug development process. And your idea was, well, why are we spending this time on patenting and your three-stage process of find it, file it, flog it, which is also the name of your book? Instead, it makes more sense to actually talk about a collaborative process that brings the healthcare practitioner working with the patients, working with a manufacturing individual, maybe in scale up, coming together and trying to invent a whole new model. And I think to that extent, you actually outline that a little bit further in your book, Find It, File It, Flog It. You also talked about the methodology to achieve that. You talked about using organ on a chip. You talked about tissues. We talked about how Fleming actually took his time, and that becomes the model that was used prior to the current model. And maybe it's time to reconsider going back to it, but using newer technologies. And then we talked a little bit about biohacking. Did I forget anything, Hedley?
No, by golly, you've got a brain the size of a planet.
I wrote it all down. Just to be clear, nothing in this podcast should be construed as legal or clinical advice of any kind. It is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. Speaking of entertainment purposes, would you be open to doing a couple of quick fire questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome.
Done.
What is an accomplishment you're most proud of?
I think it was writing a supply chain management in the drug industry because, as I say, it was 450 pages, and I had 30 expert witnesses in it from all disciplines, and I was just so pleased that they wanted to be part of it. So I think professionally, other than my wife and family, then that's my next biggest achievement.
That's awesome. When are you most inspired?
I'm most inspired by people who are selfless, and they want to help people. Whenever I meet someone who I think, yeah, they want to do the right thing in the world, and I get inspired by people like that, and I think COVID really has brought that out as well. So many people have done things unselfishly. So, yeah.
Let me see. What is the best compliment you've ever received?
Oh God, what are you doing this to me for? Gosh, I think I get compliments of people for the scale of what I'm doing in speaking up about the big pharma model and all that. There's a guy I know really well. He works in cold chain, been in cold chain for years, and he actually bought 100 copies of Find It, File It, Flog It when it first came out, and he because there was an event in Twickenham, a cold chain event, and he wanted to give them to his clients. And he said to me, Hedley, everyone knows this is happening, but no one's willing to talk about it. And that's what people say. They say, well, you're just saying what people know because I've been around so long. Maybe I'm so old, I don't know, but and it's a bit like I've seen a murder and I've got to tell people. So that's what I'm doing.
Let's ask you this question. As you know, there's been a fundamental breakdown in trust with pharma. What is the greatest opportunity pharma has to improve and address that trust breakdown, if you will?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. I like that question because I'm very skeptical of this whole patient first and patient centricity and the whole thing. If you were going to design a plane, you design it with pilots. You wouldn't ask the passengers on the plane, how do you think you want this plane to fly? It's the same in pharma. They need to work with healthcare professionals in a co-development way, and not just pharma. I mean, charities could develop drugs. 20, 30 of us could get together with different thoughts and ideas, and we could do. I did an article for the Discovery Medicines Catapult a few years ago called "Patients Band Together to Develop Their Own Drugs." It was based on the guys, the diabetics who weren't quite drugs, but they are they've got this hashtag "We Are Not Waiting," and they're developing their own sort of monitoring equipment and the whole thing because it's not economic for pharma companies to do it. And I think we've got to have people developing drugs who are non-vested, or they are vested in the disease or the indication, and they can do it themselves. It's not rocket science, it's well, and all the information's out there on the internet. If you go on the European Medicines Agency website, FDA website is superb. I'm writing what patients need to know about pharmaceutical supply chains now, and I'm getting all my references on the regulatory piece off the FDA website. And it's not difficult, but people think it is. There's been a bit of smoke and mirrors created over the years where people think, oh, this is all deep science, and you don't want to get involved in that.
Fair enough. Um, who is your hero or heroine and why?
Um, Gosh, you know, I think Stephen Covey probably, obviously never
Okay.
met him, but just his book, The Seven Principles, I forgot the name of it
Seven
now.
habits of highly
Seven,
effective people.
yeah. I mean, that and how to win friends and influence people. Again, these common sense ways of being in the world, of dealing with people. Um, there's probably other people I've missed, but that's the sort of person that I'm inspired by.
It's funny you say that. I'm actually hoping to be able to interview his son at some point. So we'll see if I get lucky. But
All right.
that should be pretty fun.
Yeah. Good luck with that. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. What is the best part of your job?
Um, on LinkedIn, I love it on LinkedIn. Just posting stuff and just interacting with people. I'm basically an introvert. That's why I like to write. But so LinkedIn is perfect for me. So it's just me here, but I can
Right.
have conversation with people. But I am going to talk for too long. I can go away. So yeah, I like people. I like interacting with people, but I like to be able to have time to think as well. So it's getting that balance.
Which raises the next question of how do you believe that technology will change the industry in 10 years? In what way will it change the industry?
I'm a real skeptic of artificial intelligence and all that. The operative word is artificial, not intelligence, because how can human beings create something that's more intelligent than them? I mean, technology is an enabler. I think it is going to, is particularly in surgery and those sorts of areas, it's going to be very enabling. Um, and in silico methods in drug development. But I always say, I've got two arms, two legs. The US is 4,000 miles away. I live in a house. It's a physical thing. We're going to be physical beings, and you've got to be very careful in what you select in terms of the technology to enable you. My biggest sort of um, impressed thing is Jeff Bezos and Amazon, because he is it's all so joined up. They're with you every step of the way. They're asking you, for feedback. I thought it was a bit invasive in first, but I published with Kindle Direct Publishing and CreateSpace before that, and they take you through it, and they use artificial intelligence to help you build the manuscript and all that. But it's me doing the manuscript, and it's all happening in the background. But I think that's going to be a big thing. But there's a lot of hype about using AI to develop drugs. Well, we know developing drugs is about doing things physically once you've got to start. So I know people will argue with me on that, but that's what I think.
How do you define success?
Doing what you enjoy, isn't it?
Okay.
It's I've never been one for. I don't mind. I don't mind being a millionaire, let's say, but I first has always been do what you enjoy, and if you can make money out of that, then that's success.
Well, let's ask the question that goes with it. How would you spend $1 million if you had it?
My wife would make me spend a lot of it on her, but I would still go on doing. I hosted a conference in Cardiff, 2018, May 2018. Medicines for the 21st century, safe, cheaper, better, or safe, better, cheaper. And Janet Woodcock actually did the keynote address. She recorded the keynote address for us. I can send you the video. It's a 3-minute headline video.
Very
And
cool.
I want to host these dialogues between the industry and the stakeholders to move the needle forward. So I want to spend money on that.
Last question. If you were going to build a Mount Rushmore to 2020, who would be the first person on it and why?
Gosh, I don't even know what Mount Rushmore is.
Oh, Mount Rushmore is the one with the presidents on it. It's got the 5 presidents.
Oh, God. See, I'm just here in the UK, out to things, and I'm not following that. So, is it about the people? I don't understand. Just
Okay, let's reframe the question. Who do you think stuck out most from 2020?
Right. Okay. That's a good question. For me, I'm desperate to see the FDA be supported, be able to be adults in the room and do the right thing. And I think the lady who, the Vice President, Kamala Harris, to me, look, I'm over here, but and I don't want to talk politics here, but I think we need people who are going to put patients first, doing the right thing first, in positions where they can actually influence things. So, and from what I've seen of what she's doing, that's what I'd say.
That person. Very cool. That is not an answer I've gotten before, so very interesting. I can see the logic. Perfect. And so I just want to make sure people catch it. We're talking, you wrote a book, Find It, File It, Flog It. It's republished right now. Where can they find it? Where can they find you, Hedley?
Yeah, well, it's on Amazon and Kindle and paperback. I put it into the expanded network as well, so it will get into bookshops eventually. And if it does work, I'll sort of get it more into bookshops. My business is Pharma Flow Limited Pharma. That's the first half of pharmaceuticals, and flow as in going with the flow. If you Google that, you get my website. And what I actually do is I use my experience and knowledge to work with companies who provide services to the industry to help them grow their brand and their business so that they can service pharma companies more effectively and they become more competitive in their particular market area. It's all supply chains, but it's helping companies with strategies to build effective supply chains. That means that they benefit. So, and I've only just updated my website, so I think people will like it. And I've got books on there and everything. So, yeah. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to plug in that.
Of course. So if you like this podcast, please leave a comment, and subscribe. You can find me at Darshan Talks on Twitter, or on our website at darshantalks.com, or on LinkedIn at Darshan Talks. Thank you again for coming on, Hedley. This was great. Thank you for joining us.
Real pleasure. Thanks, Darshan. You take care.
Take care.
Thanks.